Hello and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum. I am your host, Steve Pally. With me, as per usual, is my co-host, Professor Galen Jackson. How you doing, Galen?
Waiting for hoop season to start, man, which means I've been
Yeah.
rewatching the same clip of the 2024 Steph Curry Olympics for the last like 5 days. So,
So beautiful. So
I,
perfect.
I mean, it really was, man. It really was.
Yeah.
Can't watch it.
How are you feeling about the Dubs this year?
Man, it's hard to say. Like, I at this point, I have to just admit that I do root for them pretty hard, despite
Uh-huh.
my general conversion away from sports fandom to just appreciating the art form. But in that sense, I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic, but that team is old.
hmm
Team is very old. So
Yeah. Yeah. And if Curry goes down with anything, like, or Butler for that matter, they're
yeah.
brittle.
And Draymond's like 35, Butler's 35. Al Horford's like 90 now.
He's older than I am. It's a very high variation team,
Yeah.
right?
So, well, and then
Yeah.
plus, like, Kuminga's all pissed off. And frankly,
Yeah.
I don't really blame him. But yeah, here we
That
are.
could work in their favor, though. It probably
Maybe.
won't, but it probably won't. They'll probably get rid of him at the deadline, is my guess.
You can see why I've just been reliving the glory days of the Olympics. So,
Yeah, yeah. That is so much more straightforward than certainly what we're going to talk about today, which is muddy as heck. We are going to go back to Gaza, Galen, and we haven't been to Gaza for a number of months now. We did a couple episodes in a row on it, and we're like, we don't want to talk about this anymore. But now I feel like enough has happened, particularly like in the last day or two, that it is time to talk about it again. We're recording on Thursday, October 9th, and we are reading that a ceasefire has been signed in the Gaza conflict. And this is momentous. We started hearing about this, I think, in real terms earlier this week, that there was momentum for this. Trump has been pushing behind the scenes to get some kind of a deal done. In typical hyperbolic fashion, he's announced that it's going to change the entirety of the Middle East. Like,
yeah.
permanently, this is the start of a beautiful thing. Blessed are the peacemakers, is I believe what he said on Twitter. It's like, okay, let's slow our roll. Let's talk about what specifically has been signed, what the
Yeah.
next steps are, and where we think this thing is going, right? Because we
Yeah.
are a long ways away from a new Middle East, right, Galen?
Yeah. I mean, look, the first thing we should both say is assuming this thing gets done,
Right.
and there are still some details to work out. And I think we're still waiting on the Israeli cabinet to approve this, I think today. But assuming it gets done, like, this is good news.
Absolutely.
Very good news. They're celebrating on both sides. So we should just lead with that. This has been absolutely horrific for, 2 years and 2 days now. And so if we can get the fighting stopped, it's obviously a great sign. We should also say at least you and I both are speculating, as are other people, that the immediate impetus for Trump getting more involved in this probably had to do with Netanyahu overstepping by targeting Hamas officials in Qatar, which is a key U.S. partner and hosts U.S. military base, a quite key one in the Gulf. Reportedly, the president said that Bibi was effing him.
Yes.
So now, like, I don't think we know for sure, but that seems to have been the immediate impetus. This comes on the heels of some other things, like, the administration's been interested maybe in seeing if they can work out a better relationship with the Syrians.
Mhm.
Israel struck Syria several months ago. At least in that case, the new Syrian leader is a former Al-Qaeda operative. But I think this recent attack on Qatar was just considered
A bridge too far.
yes,
Yeah.
a line got crossed.
Let's talk about what exactly happened. This was, I think, exactly a month ago. Israel conducted airstrikes on Hamas's negotiating team prior to their meeting with the Americans, if I understand correctly.
Yeah.
And that's just like, whoa, guys, like, we understand you're pissed off and aggressive, but like, and we also understand that Hamas is a terrorist group. But if you're actually interested in solving this problem in any way, shape, or form, this is not what you do. You don't strike U.S. allies, and you don't make a fool of Trump. He doesn't do well with that, right?
Yes.
At all.
Yeah.
Made him look bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, this was quite brazen, and there was that big, I think it was New York Times Magazine, maybe over the summer, very lengthy story about how Netanyahu at various times, at least those reporters claimed, had an interest in keeping the war going. And so an interest in sabotaging any peace efforts, whether that's because he doesn't want to do that, or he thinks his government will collapse, or because if his government does collapse, he might end up in prison because Israel actually does send its leaders to prison. Hard to say, but that seemed to be part of Trump's ire, understandably as well, that, this was in the midst of a negotiation to end the fighting. So I think that also irked the White House quite a bit.
Quite a bit. And I think any president would be pissed off by something like this. Trump in particular is gunning for a Nobel Peace Prize and hasn't worked out in Ukraine. Pakistan, India, I think didn't really last long enough. Plus, he wasn't really very involved, even though he claims a lot of involvement.
Yeah.
This is his last big chance to get a peace prize because he wants to be like Obama, right?
Yeah.
I'm completely serious. Like, he's very transparent about this. And so this was like, oh, not only are you making me look bad, you're also screwing up my opportunity to get a Nobel Peace Prize. And
and by the way, we should say, as I like Barack Obama. Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize for not being George W. Bush.
That's correct. Yeah. I looked askance at that when it happened. And I think even Obama was kind of just like, okay, I'm honored.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And he went on to become the drone assassination president. So
correct.
Yeah. Anyway.
Correct. Yeah. Well, all right. We should talk about the substance of the plan.
Yes. Let's do that.
It's a 20-point plan, but I think we should just, rather than go through all 20 points, hit the highlights. So obviously a ceasefire. There's going to be an exchange of hostages and captives. Numbers don't seem totally clear to me, at least in terms of how many Palestinian prisoners will get released, but reportedly all the Israeli hostages
and bodies
and the bodies will be returned. And I think the number I saw on the Palestinian prisoner side was something like 1,700, but I'd have to double that.
Yeah.
Now, when Netanyahu and Trump were talking about this publicly, another piece of this was Trump basically said if Hamas didn't agree, Israel would then be able to do what it had to do, I think was the language he used. So there was a threat of additional punishment. There's going to be humanitarian aid allowed into Gaza via Egypt. Israel's military forces are supposed to withdraw from roughly 50 to 70% of the Strip. So those seem like a big pieces. This leaves a lot of questions unanswered, at least in terms of longer term trends that we should talk about. One of which is, this international peace board that's going to be supposedly headed by Trump and Tony Blair to oversee Gaza, which I don't know why people want more Tony Blair in the Middle East, but this is where we're at.
Yeah. And like where he came from, haven't heard from Tony Blair for a while. Little weird that he comes out of the woodwork to be like, I'm the guy to run Gaza. It's like, no, you're not. Like, not only are you not Palestinian, you're not Arab, and you're not even American. You're British.
Yeah, I know. How about just the fact that he's British getting involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict?
Yes, the former mandate of Palestine. Yeah. So lots of questions about that. The board also includes such diplomatic luminaries as Mark Rowan, who is a rich guy who's friends with Trump and I guess is interested in some way. He's probably a real estate investor. These types of guys pop up all over, Trump's administration. They're kind of like informal liaisons. Steve Witkoff is another guy. They're billionaires. They're like real estate guys and they want to be involved. So Trump's like, okay, you're involved. Congratulations. The Palestinians are like, wait, who's this guy? And then a bunch of Arabs as well, to be clear.
Okay. So, and that's part of the plan too, is like, I think they're calling it the Peace Board.
The Peace Board.
Yes. Now, This is where I've gotten a little unclear, and maybe I haven't done enough digging, but I suspect it's that the details have just not been worked out yet, which is why, by the way, I very much hope, I think everyone should hope that this happens, that there is a ceasefire.
Yes, I'm
Regardless
with
of
you.
where you're at on the conflict, I think everyone should be able to agree that would be an unmitigated good thing.
Yes.
Um, but where I get confused on some of these details is supposedly when it comes to governing Gaza, there's going to be an international force of Arab countries to provide security. But it's unclear to me whether the Israeli military will still be active, at least in some part of the strip, what authority is going to be delegated to Israeli authorities, military or otherwise, and how the international force composed of Arab peacekeepers is going to react to looking, in effect, like collaborators in the occupation. So that's a question I haven't seen answered. And the other big one you and I spoke about is disarmament. It's like it's going to be a very real sticking point as well.
Yeah. So the plan calls for Hamas to unilaterally disarm. Hamas has evinced zero willingness to do this. They're like, unilateral disarmament would be tantamount to just giving up. And nothing that then would stop the Israelis from resuming the war, except that we would no longer be able to fight in any real way. And
Yeah,
it's, well, like, you've got a point there. Why would they do that? It doesn't seem likely.
I don't know. I think at this point, like, in terms of explaining why Hamas is doing this, it's a little tricky for me to understand, leaving aside how awful Hamas is for a
Yes.
second, just viewing it strategically. Like the hostages really were their main point of leverage.
Hmm.
Um, and once that's given up, the incentive for further restraint on Israel's side, I mean, look, that's going to have to be guaranteed by the United States.
Hmm.
And we will see if that happens. But, they have been decimated by this war, particularly their senior ranks have really been wiped out. So maybe they're just saying uncle. The other thing is they were under pressure from a broad coalition of Arab countries who, in fact, encouraged them not to introduce any amendments to Trump's plan. And the other piece of this here, this has been the case for quite a while, but I think in recent weeks has really been turned up. Like they do not have any support from most Gazans.
Not at this point.
Now,
Yeah.
like, the reason I'm a little skeptical of that explanation is like Hamas has never had any problems sacrificing the lives of Gazans for their own political aims. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much importance to attach to that explanation.
Yeah. No, as we've seen, right? But I do think that they're, particularly without weapons, like they'll be unable to do whatever it is that they want to do in Gaza, whether that's self-preservation or continue to govern the entirety or parts of the strip. So, but it doesn't seem like Israel is going to be willing to support additional steps in this process without achieving that disarmament. So I see this as like an immediate sticking point that could result in the resumption of the war. There's going to have to be some kind of compromise or accommodation involving splitting the baby, where it's like, okay, you can keep small arms, but not explosives or ordnance. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to look like.
Look, in the Arabic, right? Like the abbreviation for Hamas, like it means the Islamic resistance movement. Like
Yes.
they are a resistance movement as they see themselves. So the idea that they're going to put down all of their weapons, yeah, I don't know how that's going to get handled.
Yeah.
That seems like I haven't seen good reporting on how that's going to be addressed.
Yeah. Hopefully it will be handled. Some accommodation can be found because, as we've said at the top and continue to repeat, we both think that it's time for this war to end.
Yeah.
Enough people have died. And it's an achievement to get as far as we have, but like it's a very fragile situation. And then, like, even on top of that, like if we get past the disarmament stuff and the governance stuff, there's the question of the long-term future of both the Gaza Strip and the two-state solution. if that's even still alive, right, Galen?
Yeah, and I mean, like, but before we even get to what scenarios look like for that, it's like one criticism a lot of people have been making of Israel for the past, well, for quite a while, even before October 7th, but certainly since then, and especially in recent months, is military actions and tactical excellence detached from political objectives. What is Israel's long-term strategy here? So they have achieved what many people would consider to be unbelievably impressive military and intelligence success over the past 2 years. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they gambled going after the Iranians, which we've talked about, and they got Trump to follow up. As we discussed, that the last chapter of that story has yet to be written, but at least in the interim, it looks quite successful. They decapitated Hezbollah and really weakened that movement. They have really decimated Hamas. The Selfer or Beeper operation against Hezbollah was brilliantly executed. Assad fell in Syria, and maybe they might have a new government in Damascus more willing to work with them. And yet, I see no indication that the Israeli government, or for that matter, much of the Israeli public, has much sense of how to convert that success into long-term political stability.
Yeah.
And part of that deals with your question, which is it's going to be very difficult even to clinch this ceasefire. I hope it goes off without a hitch. But to put it bluntly, Gaza is supposed to be the easier part. Like the West Bank is much more difficult. And this is a ceasefire agreement. This is not a peace settlement. And there's a lot of obstacles in the way to a two-state solution that did not exist 25 years ago. And those efforts did not succeed. So it's hard for me to be optimistic about how we convert this into a long-term peace settlement.
Right. So here's what I would say, looking at the situation and the actions of Israel vis-a-vis Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank over the past 2 years. The actions, the strategy has been consistent with the enactment of a one-state solution. Now, there's a couple different ways to enact a one-state solution. One is mass expulsion, ethnic cleansing, right? And guess what? We actually heard a little bit about that from certain elements in the Israeli government over the past 2 years. Doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Good. However, if we're doing a one-state solution, that now means that you are governing however many million Palestinians, less 70,000, right? Unfortunately, as a result of this war. And you are having to administer that territory and provide security. Difficult for a small country like Israel. Perhaps not worthwhile.
Well, there's more variations in what this looks like than just that. I mean, I think you're referring to people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who have openly talked about annexing these territories and driving Palestinians out and so forth.
Yes.
That's probably a point worth making was this isn't new. I actually wrote a thing about this, I think like 5 years ago when talk of annexing the West Bank was first being openly discussed anyway, I think back before 2020, but that topic came up again in the last few weeks. And I wonder how much of that influenced Trump. I can't speak to it, but it's possible that played a role in him getting more involved in this as well. Look, people that study this stuff make the following points. All right. If you have three different things that you can have, right? The actual territory, i.e. the West Bank and Gaza, being a Jewish state and being a democracy, or it's more or less impossible to have all three of those. You can only be two.
Yep.
Okay.
Iron triangle. Yeah.
Yes.
That's a great way of framing it.
Yeah. And the two-state solution supposes that Israel wants to be a democracy and a Jewish state. It has to give up the territory. I am pretty much not convinced at all at this point that there's almost any appetite among mainstream Israelis for doing that at this point. We have gone and by the way, like there has been a major deterioration on the Palestinian side for support, not necessarily for a two-state solution, but for political engagement. Israelis think they got burned by the 1990s and Palestinians think they've been burned for much longer than that. So the one-state solution you're talking about could be something on the order of what Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are talking about. I don't think many people hope that happens. I certainly don't hope that happens, but
I don't think it's going to happen, most likely, at least not right now.
it is something you have to think about.
Yeah, I think the Gaza Strip has been completely destroyed. And there is a pragmatic question of like, well, how are people going to live here now?
Well, it's going to take
enormous
amounts of reconstruction aid, and presumably
decades.
that will come from the Gulf states, and it'll take tons of time. But like, the other thing is, there has been lots of reconstruction aid given to Gaza over the past nearly 2 decades since Hamas won an election in 2006, I believe, and things had been rebuilt, and then it's been destroyed. So we are in this cycle of violence, and as much as a ceasefire would be good, it will not solve the long-term problems. The other version of a one-state solution is something the Israelis will never go for, because it would involve giving up the Jewish state part of the triangle, which would be, if you want to be a democracy and have the territory, then the 7 million or so Palestinians have to have equal rights and be equal citizens within a binational state. So that doesn't seem like it's plausible to me either.
No, it doesn't. And when you think about the composition of Israel demographically, right, we have, I think, 10 million Israelis, but a substantial portion of them are, in fact, Arab Israelis who are.
Let me check this. I should know this off the top of my head.
I feel like it's like 3 million.
Well, so I know that 20% of the Israeli population.
Then that's 2 million roughly.
Yeah. So the Israeli population is about 10 million.
Yep. Yeah. So that's 2 million. You add that to 7 million Palestinians. That's 9 million Arab voters versus 8 million Jewish voters. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Right.
But so then the alternative is basically the status quo as it has existed, albeit in different manifestations.
Yeah.
But the basic structure has been that way since the June 1967 war.
Right.
And so, I always say the only way I get to optimism here is via pessimism, which is like the 2-state solution. The reason it continues to be discussed seriously, despite being pronounced dead for many times, is it's really the only solution that doesn't massively suck for a very large number of people.
Yeah. And I don't know what the latest opinion polling in Israel for one state versus 2-state solutions is. I think that nobody is really happy with either idea.
Yeah.
And the Palestinians, I mean,
well, look, I don't know what the exact figures are, but the peace camp in Israel basically was gutted by the Second Intifada.
Yeah.
Now, I'm doing some work on this right now. I think there are problematic narratives all over the place when it comes to the Middle East, but the Israeli narrative goes something like this. We tried this in the 90s. We made them a major offer, particularly in 2000 at Camp David, and then with the Clinton parameters during the lame duck period of the Clinton presidency. And the Palestinians walked away and started which was quite different, in terms of how it was received internationally than the first Intifada and its effect on Israeli public opinion. There's this other kind of smaller effort, I guess, under Ehud Olmert in 2007, 2008 that some people point to. But, by that point, Olmert was facing major corruption charges and it didn't really go anywhere. And so the narrative is basically like, well, why should we try for peace again? Like, we tried it and we're rewarded with an Intifada. And on the Palestinian side, it looks very different, which is like these negotiations weren't pursued in good faith all along. There, continued to be expansion of Israeli settlements throughout this period. The deal that was offered to them actually wasn't nearly as good as many people have claimed. And by the way, look at all these spoilers that got involved on the Palestinian side, right? Suicide bombings by Hamas. On the Israeli side, Yitzhak Rabin being assassinated by a far-right Israeli, and people like Baruch Goldstein going into a mosque and using a machine gun to kill large numbers of Palestinians who were praying. So the Palestinian view is, no, that's way too simplistic of a story. But this is all to say, there's basically no trust
No.
and very little support or belief that this can happen. Netanyahu, at his speech at the UN, which maybe we should talk about, said the creation of a Palestinian state would be tantamount to suicide for Israel. And what everyone thinks of Netanyahu is he is now by a large margin the longest serving prime minister in Israel's history, which indicates that he, represents the political mainstream to some degree. So it's not a nice story to tell.
It's not. It's not, but like we kind of have to go into it,
Yeah.
right? To your point about the aborted peace process in the late Clinton period, you can draw a line between that and the rise of Hamas to a certain extent. Hamas won a democratic election, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct.
And then they established an authoritarian state in Gaza.
Also correct.
Yeah. So yeah, there's very clear cause and effect. And it's not clear to me, like as a result of this war and the ceasefire, that either the Gazans or the Palestinians in the West Bank are suddenly ready for peace necessarily. I don't know enough about it to be able to say one way or the other, but it just doesn't seem likely to me, right?
Maybe we should talk about the international politics of this, because at least in my opinion, that's where the rubber meets the road. Like,
yeah, let's do that.
To put a bow on it, as you said, right? Like Hamas won a free and fair election. Now they also clamped down thereafter, and they haven't had a follow-up election in almost 2 decades since then. And
yeah,
they're now thoroughly sick of them, I would imagine, for obvious reasons. Meanwhile, like prior to October 7th, Netanyahu's policy was literally to make sure bags of cash got to the Hamas leadership in Gaza so that they would actually stay in power, because as long as Hamas was in power in Gaza, he could plausibly claim there's no unified Palestinian leadership between the West Bank and Gaza, and we're obviously not going to go negotiate with an organization that denies our right to exist.
At some point, you have to think that the Israelis remember that detail, right?
Well,
and it's kind of important.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why right after October 7th, that was one of the reasons many people thought Netanyahu's days in power were numbered.
Yeah, but then he won all these wars, right?
Correct.
So,
But I guess more fundamentally, I just don't see the appetite.
Yeah.
Like, I guess I'll put it this way. When I wrote my book, I'm dealing with the immediate post-67 phase, which I would argue, I'm in the minority on this. Most people see the 90s as the best opportunity. I would argue the 70s is the best opportunity. Like, think of the obstacles that are not in the way at that time. There is no Hamas. There is no Hezbollah.
No settlers.
Very few settlers. Until the very end of the decade, there's no revolutionary Iran. Basically the entire world is lined up for this settlement. And if your argument is the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, wasn't willing to play ball, I think that's debatable, first of all. And two, like, it's not even a state. It's a non-state movement. It's in no position to resist the will of the combined influence of the Americans, the Soviets, the Europeans, the whole Arab world, right? Like,
yeah.
Well, so what I said was, even then, the only way this happens is if a settlement is imposed by the great powers. And I think that's basically true today, assuming that the two-state solution isn't already a dead carcass.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. The main power, obviously, that we need to talk about is the United States, both because it's still the greatest great power, and it is still the most directly involved in the region. It is Israel's greatest ally. And many would argue, I make this argument, that like Israel's biggest asset is its special relationship with the United States. Now, when this conflict kicked off, there were a lot of questions around what Hamas was trying to accomplish. You could squint and say they're playing the long game by making the Israelis overreact, destroying their international support, and maybe, in fact, loosening the ties between Israel and America, which have been very tight for a very long time in terms of public opinion. And now we look at the numbers coming in as a result of what has happened during this 2-year war, and you can kind of see it happening, which is notable.
You mean public opinion in the United States?
Yeah, not just the United States. I mean, like in Europe as
Oh,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought the UN walkout when Netanyahu went to the lectern was, I don't think it will shift anything in policy terms. I can show you documents from the 70s with people like Henry Kissinger basically saying, like, the Israelis are fine as long as they know that the US is with them. I think
Yep.
that's basically still the case.
It is still the case.
But I wouldn't say it's completely trivial
Yeah.
to have that happen.
A bunch of G7 countries and G20 countries have now recognized Palestine as a state. And you can laugh at international law and diplomacy and be like, they don't have armies. Like, they're a bunch of clowns. This doesn't matter. They're being fooled. They're anti Semitic. It's like, okay, but this still happened. This is new. Like, I think if, you're pro Israel and you're just discounting that out of hand, you're not paying attention. And
Okay.
then within the United States, things are certainly changing, right, Galen?
Yeah. I mean, like, just to put a bow on the UN point, like, the only entity I believe that can actually recognize a state legally is the Security Council.
Okay.
And because the United States is on the Security Council,
They veto it. Yeah.
But I think what you're getting at with what's happening with American attitudes is the key. But I'm going to put a giant asterisk on that. And I forget to come back to it. Remind me so that we can follow up on it. I mean, if your view, which I would say generally is my view, that the special relationship is not really a function of strategic factors. There are people who make that argument. There are even some important people who make that argument. I'm not persuaded, having looked at quite a few of these documents. I think the special relationship has generally had to do with things like the legacy of the Holocaust, moral considerations, even people like George Kennan, who on strategic grounds initially were quite opposed to the US recognition of Israel in the first place, then later said something to the effect of like, look, we've made this commitment. We can't just like get rid of it. And basically what happened during the Holocaust was bad enough. We can't have it happen again. You see that very frequently. Documents. There's also a concern which goes across administrations that, hey, if you got a really nasty US-Israeli showdown, that might lead to some sort of anti-Semitic backlash in the United States. I think probably there's a lot of people concerned about that for obvious reasons today. And then, there's a domestic political element here with broad popular support and more organized forms of support for Israel in the American political system. I think that's generally more what the relationship is about. If you believe that's true, then the fact that the New York Times did a poll that came out last week that suggests there has been substantial drop-off in sympathy for Israel, particularly on the left, somewhat on the right, although it's much smaller, which represents a shift, by the way. 30 years ago, going back during the Cold War, Israel was much more of an issue in Democratic Party politics. But I think it was Steve Spiegel, who we both know from UCLA, said that the turning point for that is kind of the Gingrich takeover in 1994.
Yeah.
I think you could probably say Reagan was an important inflection point there too. We could debate when the starting point is for that. Say it's in the mid-90s. Anyway, on the left, this poll suggested a very major drop-off to the point where, for the first time, as far as I'm aware of, there was more people on the left among Democrats who sympathize with the Palestinians over Israelis, and majorities of Americans opposed to providing Israel with more economic and military aid.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, that was striking.
Yeah.
So people have been warning about this for a long time, that if, public support in the US for Israel declines, could be a real big problem for the special relationship.
Yeah. Let me ask you two questions. First, in the history of the special relationship, has it ever declined? Has support for Israel ever declined this much overall or in one party?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Not this steep of a drop off. I could be wrong about that, but I think this the size of this drop off, I think, is unprecedented.
I think you're right. And if we take your point about like a lot of this being born out of the Holocaust, which I think is correct, by the way, the Holocaust is getting further and further away, as is World War II. And I think that has a lot to do with a lot of the changes we're seeing throughout international politics, right? It's like generationally, that's, we're getting towards 80 years since the end of all that stuff. It'll be a century within our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's ancient history, right? So like all of that is significant. My other question is whether you think this degradation will have consequences in the short to midterm, number one, or the long term, number two, or whether we expect a bounce back if the war is in fact over.
I'm going to be a little bit annoying and say, I don't know.
No, I think you're going to be correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason there's a few reasons I'm saying it. One, I guess I'll apologize to my students, but I kind of can't resist trolling Gen Z at this point. It turns out Gen Z is not as liberal as they thought they were based on the most recent election in this country.
Although that seems to be turning around, but we'll see. Right?
I mean, we'll see, when the votes get counted the next time. There was this book written about a decade ago by Dana Allen and Steve Simon. I think it was called Our Separate Ways. Basically, the argument in that book was the U.S. and Israel were on divergent paths because Israeli politics was heading in a far right direction and American politics was heading in a very different direction. The first claim seems to have held up. The second claim, I think, is very much up in the air at the moment. There's that. The other thing is these twin claims about just public support in general and young people in the United States are not new claims. So whenever I teach this, I assign an article by a guy named George Ball, who served in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations and would have been Carter's Secretary of State, but Carter thought he could not get confirmed by the Senate because of his views on Israel. And Ball wrote an article called The Coming Crisis in Israeli-American Relations, which basically made this argument. Strategically, the two countries are diverging, and so the bedrock of support for Israel in the United States has to do with public opinion and, these moral factors we identified. And he thought that those were basically losing steam. He wrote that article in 1979. And here we are, I should say, support in Congress for Israel tends to remain quite high. In terms of substantive policy changes, this recent ceasefire aside, I don't detect any major decline in official support. I mean, you could say this about Biden, right? Obviously a Democrat. Even with the pressure he was getting from his co-partisans, pursued what I would call a pretty staunch pro-Israel policy after October 7th. And I'll just read this. I came across this the other day for something I'm working on. This was the first Bush, who I should say was the last president to actually take a forceful line with Israel after the 1991 Persian Gulf War. And he was talking to a guy named Yitzhak Shamir, who was Israel's prime minister. And this was in the midst of the first Intifada. And Bush told him that public support for Israel was diminished, especially among young people. The automatic or reflexive sympathy for Israel is diminishing here. Whatever the reason, the use of force and violence associated with the Intifada are having an impact. So I've been hearing this argument, and that was in 1989. This argument for a very long time. This case does seem different, just the scale of the war, but we have seen these moments of tension in U.S.-Israeli relations before, and things tend to bounce back. Maybe this time will be different, but I guess I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I'm not out here saying that strategically Hamas's decision to do what it did on October 7th and then continue to resist what Israel subsequently did was a good strategic decision, right? But you can kind of see the strategic logic behind it of isolating Israel, because to a certain extent, this is what happened to the United States post September 11th, by the way. We squandered a lot of our diplomatic support and our diplomatic assets, right?
I almost said that when you brought this up a few minutes ago. That seemed
Yeah.
an appropriate analogy. It was like,
Yeah. And Yahya Sinwar, right,
yep,
was the architect of the atrocity on October 7th. He was not a dumb guy at all.
bad guy, but not a
He's a
dumb guy.
bad guy. Yeah. But he understood Israel, and I think he understood the West and what was likely to happen as a result of what he did. So, you could be like, well, they're plans within plans, and it's a 100-year horizon or whatever, and like, we'll eventually win. It's like, I don't know, you're dead, and so are 70,000 plus more Palestinians. So congratulations, I guess.
Yeah, but this is kind of why I thought what you said about the September 11th attacks sort of resonated with me. It's like Osama bin Laden is dead. Al-Qaeda was substantially degraded. And the United States is still very active in the Middle East. The relationship with Israel still has troops in the Persian Gulf. Things for Iraqis have not exactly gone well, and those were kind of his three grievances. That said, if the goal was to get the United States to make a whole bunch of
Mistakes,
wounds,
mission accomplished, right?
I think at this point that is indisputable. In the same way, you could argue this has been a crushing loss for Hamas, right?
Oh, it clearly, yeah. And Palestine, yeah.
Their popularity in Gaza is, in the toilet for obvious reasons. Their senior leadership has been decimated. Great power, or not great power, their regional patron in the form of Iran and their other allies have also been decimated. That said, they did bring the Palestinian question roaring back to the forefront of international.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Israel is potentially jeopardizing its support in the United States, and they did succeed in torpedoing Saudi-Israeli normalization. So,
good point.
These are strategic objectives.
Yeah. What do we know about the state of Saudi-Israel normalization vis-a-vis this peace process? They're linked, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had Andrew on talking about this a few months ago.
Yep.
always be normalizing. My sense is that the price has gone way up. I need a little more information. There's been reporting. I might even have it right here. I think it was called like The War That Wouldn't End, was in the Atlantic maybe last fall. Yeah, by Franklin Foer. Where he starts that article on October 6th. He's insinuating that a Saudi-Israeli normalization deal is around the corner, if I recall.
Right.
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I think the Saudis previously were going to get like a fig leaf for the Palestinians, sort of similar to how Anwar Sadat did things when the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty was signed. I think their price now actually is like tangible step,
some kind of state
to create a Palestinian state.
Yeah, which does not seem in the offing at the moment. And then, like, setting the Saudis aside for a moment, there are fresh problems elsewhere in the neighborhood for Israel as a result of this. There's problems with the Emirates. There's problems with the Turks.
Yep. And
that one, I think, is kind of underreported, but potentially pretty important. What do you think about that?
If I'm Israel, I'm maybe a little less concerned about that one. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. I mean, Turkey and Israel have had quite bad relations for some time now, going back to the 2010 flotilla operation.
Yes.
Israel has imposed a blockade on Gaza since, I believe, 2007. And so that caused a major row. And the other thing is, it's certainly a problematic ally within the alliance, but Turkey is in NATO.
Yes.
It does create some natural constraints on what it can do without angering the Americans and the rest of the alliance. But yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm just recalling our conversation about the Great Power Draft, which was a fun one. And you gave Turkey a top 10 status, which I didn't agree with, but it's like, no,
I might live to regret that one.
No, I thought about it some more. Like, we came at the exercise differently, and I thought about it some more. I'm like, no, that's justifiable. Like, this is a powerful country that matters a lot. Erdogan has been in charge now for a very long time. He's
2002.
Yeah, he's now a full autocrat. So what he says goes as far as Turkish policy is concerned. There's like he's jailed the opposition at this point. Yes, Turkey is still in NATO, but like I don't like not in a very clear way to me, given its behavior. I think Trump is willing to overlook a lot of that behavior, but there could be a future where Turkey is not in NATO.
Yeah.
And Erdogan in particular has been super vocal about condemning the Israelis for what they've done in the war. Turkey's a lot closer to Israel than a lot of these other places, right?
And it's, I'd have to check, but I think it's a country of something like 85 million people. It's a large country. We could have a debate, but you could plausibly argue Turkey has the premier military in the region.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, in purely qualitative terms, I would give the edge to the Israelis, but Israel is so much smaller as a fighting force because it's such it's the size of New Jersey in effect.
But like, if we consider Egypt neutralized for decades versus Israel,
you don't, which I would say is undeniable. Yeah,
that's undeniable. It's like you don't want to start something with Turkey in the neighborhood. Like that would be bad.
Yeah. On the other hand, right? Like, so another point you and I have talked about before is like U.S. officials for decades. I can't speak to what Trump thought. I think we have some reporting that Biden, in a somewhat different way related to Israel's image internationally and things like that, might agree with this. I think Obama would have agreed with it. But throughout the Cold War, many U.S. officials basically said Israel pursues a self-defeating policy.
Mm-hmm.
Kissinger at one point said Israel pursues a diplomacy that leads to suicide.
Yeah.
And so the argument was, look, you can have the best fighting force in the region. You can do all these you can decapitate Hezbollah with, a beeper attack or whatever.
And that was amazing.
Yeah, no, I mean, like really impressive.
Yeah.
But the only way to have real security is to reach an accommodation with your neighbors. Okay.
Yeah.
And I generally buy that. I generally still buy that. On the other hand, you could make an argument, leaving Turkey aside, that Israel's doing just fine, like in purely power political terms, leaving aside, the walkout at the UN and the backlash internationally about the last 2 years. But it's possible they'll get some sort of deal with the new Syrian government. I think they've somewhat gone backward in their relations with the Gulf Arabs because the threat of Iran has, at least for now, largely been defanged, which has ironically removed the glue that was holding them closer to Israel. But, you could argue in strictly power political terms, they're doing okay. And so Erdogan can kick and scream all he wants. And
I can't remember if I had Israel in my top 10 or not, but they were like I think 11 or 12.
I think you were like an honorable mention for them.
Honorable mention because I mean, they're basically hegemonic at the moment in their neighborhood, and like they're acting like it. Now, whether or not that's a good idea long term for such a small state, it's like I'll leave that aside, right? And what Israel does not want and cannot afford is any kind of war of attrition.
Correct.
Yeah, that remains true, right?
I'm really bringing the Kissinger quotes today. Kissinger said a war of attrition would be Israel's death warrant.
And he was right then and he's right now. So like, I don't foresee that. And the Palestinians can't do it, obviously. But it's an isolated Israel is not a more powerful Israel.
I agree. I'm just kind of making the case. And like, as far as Turkey goes, I just don't know what Turkey's going to do. Like, I don't think Turkey's going to go to war with Israel. Their relationship been really bad for quite a while. So I think
I don't either. To me, the way this would look is Turkey moving further and further into Lebanon and Syria. And then like having friction there in place of Iran.
Maybe. I mean, the issue is like Turkey, like, the Middle East has a long history and those countries remember the Ottoman times.
Yes.
when the Turks were kind of the imperial power in the area.
That's right.
So I don't think there's any desire to have Turkey move into those vacuums, as it were, and replace Iran.
I'm sure there's not. And plus, Turkey is, I think, primarily Sunni.
Correct.
And yeah, so that presents issues. But yeah, the more that Erdogan makes noises about being a lion of Islam, which he's like, his party is a religious party.
Yes.
And I think that's frequently forgotten. He doesn't present as a theocrat, but the older and more powerful he gets, yeah, there's more and more messianic language. I don't know. I don't know why.
We should do a Turkey episode.
I would like to do a Turkey episode.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah. Anyway,
well, my question then for you is like, I don't know, like something on the order of like, tell me how this ends, because I mean,
yeah,
it's like really hard for me to believe this, but I kind of feel like the most likely outcome is an indefinite continuation of the status quo. And the only way that changes I see are, one, mass expulsions.
Yep.
And, neither of us, most people don't want to see that happen, but
I don't think it will happen.
Okay. Well, then it's the status quo, or the only other way this happens is that there is a real shift in American policy. And maybe we can talk about what that would look like, but it's kind of hard for me to envision what that would even look like at this point.
So in order of probability, the odds of things happening would be, one, a resumption of hostilities, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Two, hot peace, resumption of status quo, occasional attacks, mowing the grass on both sides, all that good stuff that we've seen for decades. It's not good stuff. It sucks.
Yeah.
Number three would be a major shift inside the United States. I think that's not off the table, honestly. So,
but that's how you're rank ordering, or those.
I understand that these things can go together too.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm kind of conflating likelihood and timing, I guess.
Okay.
Because that would take longer. But I think the point I want to make is support has degraded inside the Democratic Party, unquestionably. The next Democratic president may not be a big fan of Israel. So I don't know when that's going to happen or who that's going to be, but that's notable. Even within the Republican Party, I don't think that continued support is a foregone conclusion. I think that the more populist elements inside the Republican Party, it's like, while Trump is there, it's whatever he wants to do. He's not going to be there forever. So next up, you got J.D. Vance. Marjorie Taylor Greene has made a lot of noises about a lot of different things. And say what you will about her, but she is an important voice in the America First policy. And she's like, America First means America first. Why are we contributing to this?
Well, she's also said some crazy anti-Semitic stuff too.
Yes, she has. Yes, indeed she has. But I think that if you're talking about the Republican Party of 2025, you need to talk about that.
So if I get the numbers wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure that New York Times poll I referenced a little while ago was that the drop off on the Republican side had gone from 76% support for Israel to 64.
Yep.
Which is, by the way, 12 points is not nothing, but it's not nothing. Sympathy for the Palestinian side was 9.
Yeah.
The reason I'm a little skeptical on the GOP is the evangelical bloc, which I would have to double check, but I think is 80 million people, something.
It's huge. Yeah.
They are major supporters of Israel.
Good point.
I always want to point out that in their view of what the rapture looks like, so on and so forth, things generally don't really work out for Jewish people.
No.
Which is a point worth making. But for now, they are major supporters of Israel because of how they interpret the book of Revelations.
You're right.
And that block really cannot be ignored in Republican Party politics. On the Democratic side, I'll be curious to see. Like I said, I've heard this story before. On the other hand, a point I should have made is, yes, the ongoing situation has 100% catalyzed or accelerated the trend on the left in the United States.
Yeah.
but it is not an entirely new trend. I think this really started to take off during the Obama presidency, when many Democrats thought that the Israelis were just frankly disrespectful to the president, like when the Republicans invited Netanyahu to give an address to Congress in 2015 in a direct effort to go over the president's head in an effort.
That was bad and also kind of hilarious. Yeah, but like we're talking about one of two parties here, and that's a lot worse than two of two parties.
Correct.
I just want to wrap up with the fourth of four possibilities in terms of likelihood and timing, and that's the Carthaginian solution. It's the mass expulsions, ethnic cleansing, one state. I think it's important to note that the people that have talked about this run small political parties, like understanding that there's been a right-wing shift in Israeli politics. I don't know what the appetite really is for mass expulsion and ethnic cleansing. I don't know. And then on top of that, I have to think that if that process started, additional risks would materialize for Israel.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I don't know either because I'm not as expert on Israeli public opinion.
Yeah.
On this. I think you're right, though. I think that as much as Israeli politics has shifted, my sense is that would not be something that the vast majority of Israelis would support. And I think the potential consequences for that would be so severe that it would become less popular. Again, I speak with any kind of expert knowledge on that, though. The other part of this, frankly, that it's weird to say this given how grim this conversation has already been, but in some ways disturbs me more than anything else, is if you include East Jerusalem, there are now over 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, Israeli settlers, okay? A lot of settlers are well armed. Obviously, Israel has not totally universal until very recently, but largely universal military service requirements. And a lot of them are ideological, believe, the West Bank is rightfully Israel, or at least of them. Even assuming you could get a deal worked out, like if you read Dennis Ross's book, The Missing Piece, he describes this encounter with the former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, where he's like asking him about how you would handle this. And Rabin basically gives the answer to the effect of like, I think I can handle any pushback and violence because like I'm the most decorated military hero in the history of the country. And so I've got plenty of political allies within the military. But I think you could plausibly argue that we should be concerned about some sort of major civil conflict in that.
Yeah, we're talking about well-armed Jewish fundamentalists who, notably, their rate of population increase is fast, much faster than I think the typical Israeli public, and I think even much faster than the surrounding Arabs and Palestinians.
You're talking about the Orthodox population?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like these are not the same populations, but there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, that's a major sticking point. It's like the composition of the Israeli voting public is changing, number one. And number two, like there's a lot of heterogeneity in terms of geography, right? That is standing in the way of a durable peace. I'd like to close by discussing a short article I read by Yair Lapid. I think I read it yesterday or the day before. It's notable.
Head of the opposition within Israel.
That's right. And he has organized an opposition because the opposition was kind of in disarray for a while. And then during the war, the opposition agreed to do a unity government type thing with Netanyahu. And now they are saying, we're organized. We're not going to do a unity government. It's time to have elections and change this country's direction. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means like a resumption of like, the two-state track or something else. But I think it's notable because Netanyahu has had a stranglehold on Israel for a long time.
He is, with the exception of that 1 year when Naftali Bennett was prime minister. I think that was like 2021, 2022, something like that.
I'm pretty sure Bennett is part of the coalition that is assembling against him.
There's just to say Netanyahu has been prime minister for 15 of the last 16 years, plus 3 years in the 90s. Like, I agree with you. It's notable. And maybe this just dooms me to like, whenever there is a change, I will be wrong. But like, I don't foresee there being major changes when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yeah,
I unfortunately think that there are vast majorities of Israelis and Palestinians,
that want to fight more.
well, don't necessarily want to fight. I mean, as we just saw, there's been like large scale celebrations on both sides.
I said that wrong. They're willing to fight more.
Yeah, well, like, I don't even know how you would get this started now, right? Like the term, like a person we both went to grad school with, which for like sake of his privacy, I won't say his name, but you used to basically say like, look, the issue here is very simple. Like for there to be a successful negotiation, there has to be a range of outcomes that are mutually acceptable to two sides. They have to overlap. And we have this.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
gap between what is mutually acceptable. And today I basically think that's right. And
It's like even further away, right?
yeah, I
Basically.
would agree with that. And I don't think that even a country as powerful as the United States, I'm not sure it's even capable of doing it at this point. And I'm very skeptical it's willing to put in an effort to impose an agreement.
That idea of the bargaining range applied somewhat differently, I think was first formalized by James Fearon, who I think
Yes.
is still at Stanford, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, even though this idea is not a new idea, it's an old idea. But if you like mathematical models, check out that foundational paper.
Hey, I mean, I think that Rationalist Explanations for War is like one of the most cited articles in the history of political science. So
canonical. Yeah, so we're letting our nerd flags fly a little bit here at the end. All right, so we'll probably take another break from this subject.
I need one.
Yeah, but thanks for dropping knowledge on us, Galen. That was awesome.
Hey, you too, man.
Yeah, and until next time, this has been Global Tantrum.